have your attention? We're going to get started shortly. I just want to thank you all for being here and welcome you. If you don't know me, I'm Jackie Duda. I'm the health agent and I work for the Board of Health here in East Hampton.
You sound like you're talking in an echo chamber.
Let's just close it. Fenway Park.
Can't help that. I'm not in charge of technology. Health, yes. Technology, no. If you're here, we especially appreciate that you're here because you're interested in the issue of smoking in East Hampton, and so are we. In fact, tobacco use is at a higher rate here in East Hampton than any of the surrounding communities per capita, so we're particularly concerned about that here in the health department. And we're doing a few things here and there to try to address the tobacco use in the city. We're doing this conference, and we've paid for the refreshments and other things with a grant from Cooley Dickinson Healthcare, so they're also interested in this. In fact, they approached us and asked if we wanted to work with them together. I also want to give some acknowledgement to Sandra Mandel back there in the back of the room, who is the manager for this grant and arranged this conference and got you all here. So thank you for coming. Our speaker tonight is attorney Chris Banthen. Chris is with the Public Health Advocacy Institute, which is part of the Northeastern University Law School. Chris is an expert on the subject matter. He works with a lot of public health departments and boards of health across the state, and he has a wide breadth of knowledge on the subject matter. So I'll just introduce Chris and enjoy the talk.
Thank you. That's a generous introduction for me. Let's see what I can do if I ever earn that. Sandra, can you go to the next slide, please?
Absolutely.
So this is an overview of what I want to try to cover tonight. The last thing I want to do is stay up here and just speak the whole time. So, I'd love to get questions and comments throughout the presentation. I would just ask that we'd be respectful and let everybody have a chance to comment and to not monopolize the whole conversation. So thank you. Here's what I want to cover. A few things to consider. This is the sort of basic health and safety. I think everybody knows that secondhand smoke has an adverse health effect. But how dangerous it is still kind of unknown. It's relevant for you as landlords. Who here's a landlord? Or okay, condos, folks. Do you have any condos as well? Condos. Okay, I'll talk about that as well. It's relevant because it's not just those long-term effects of lung cancer and things way down the road, but it's also the things that happen right away. The asthma attack, stroke, heart attack, things like that. So I'll dive into a little bit of detail on that. The big question for a lot of folks is, what's this going to do to my bottom line, my business of being a landlord? So I want to talk a little bit about that as well, and it also has ramifications for condominiums. There's an economic change here. So I'll talk about that. Process of going smoke-free. This is my recommendations for implementation. All right, so we'll talk in depth about that. Enforcement and compliance, that's always the big question. Is anybody going to follow this rule? Is this thing going to work? How do I enforce it? And we'll talk about that too. And trends, I'll just touch on this. And I can even kind of give you the short answer now. Trends, this is, what's happening in the marketplace and what's happening in our state house and our boards of health, our regulators, what are they thinking? In the marketplace, lots of places are going smoke-free. This is quite a trend, not just in Massachusetts, but across the country. As far as, proposed legislation and proposed regulation, not a lot out there. Not a lot out there. This is a voluntary thing. Okay, so let's get right into it. Next slide, please. So you got a lot of things that are combusted in the home, right? And this rule that I'm going to talk about tonight, it's not a new rule, right? This thing has been around for a long time. Has anybody ever heard of the no burn rule? No candles, no incense, no smoking. Been around for a little bit of while. So anyway, where does tobacco fall on that? Well, that's, you decide. Next slide, please. I have this slide to give you a sense of all of the effects that make the air circulate throughout your building. I mean, you know this because you probably get complaints about people smelling other people's cooking smells, right? And so there are a lot of effects going on here. You have the wind effect, you have convection, the heat and cool rising, you have the active ventilation system. All of those effects determine how air flows from unit to unit, whether it goes up and down. Typically you think of smoke rising, right? And heat rising in a building, so it would go up. And it does. A lot of people may say, okay, I put the smoke on the top floor and the smoke will go up. But you get unusual air effects where it can be circulated throughout a building. Let's say you have a common heating system and an old house that's been divided up into units. You're going to get smoke throughout the building. Plus, smoke, part of smoke, it's a gas, right? It's a particulate matter and it's gas. And when you put gas in a room, like a vapor, it expands to occupy the room. And the secondhand smoke will do the same thing. Next slide, please. And so here's a unit in that building, right? And the arrows are airflow. And you may be thinking, wow, that's a leaky bad unit. But it's not, right? You need to have a certain amount of airflow in your building, in your units, to keep mold down. In fact, the sanitary code talks about air exchanges and things you need to have to make sure you have air moving from unit to unit. And that, it's a good thing, but it also carries cooking smells, and it carries secondhand smoke. I get a lot of calls from landlords who say, can I seal up the unit? Actually, it's more, where are you? I ask them, where are you at? And they said, well, I've sealed up the unit, but that's not helping. And that's true. I mean, it's rare that sealing up the unit actually helps. Plus, you run the danger of sealing it up and getting mold and stuff like that. So this is kind of suggestive of the fact that, look, there's not a good mechanical fix here to addressing smoke going from unit to unit. Next slide. I won't go through all this stuff. There's a lot of things. This is a breakdown of secondhand smoke. So we're talking about stuff goes from unit to unit, including secondhand smoke. So here's what's in it. You have a gas phase, you have particulate. You got a lot of stuff in secondhand smoke that's not too good. This is the important part, right? Secondhand smoke is a Class A carcinogen. So what does that mean? That means there's no known safe level of exposure. Okay, so what does that mean? That means when you ask yourself, okay, when do I have to worry about this? When do I have to worry about smoke going from unit to unit? You're not going to find a bright line, safe level of exposure. It's a Class A carcinogen. So that means if you can smell it, it's bad for you. Anybody know what some other Class A chemicals are? Take a guess. Asbestos, benzene. Yeah, the really bad ones. Like if you had open asbestos in your unit, you'd be in trouble. You'd want to seal that up right away, get rid of it, abate that. So, you really have this, yes, a lot of people smoked, they used to, and some people still do, but it's, it still doesn't mitigate the fact that it's very dangerous. Okay, next slide. So we talked about this, right? We have smoke going from unit to unit. We have it in the unit. Once it gets there, it stays there for a long time. Right? We go to work. Our workplaces are smoke-free, and then we come home, and our places, our homes are often not smoke-free. So there was a study. I don't have a bullet point on this, but there's a study done in Massachusetts, and it looked at two groups of kids. And the groups of kids were exactly the same. Mom and dad or grandma or whoever the caregiver wasn't smoking in the house. They were living in a smoke-free house. The only difference between the two kids was one group lived in a building like this, and another group lived in single detached family dwellings. Guess which group had nicotine or it's a metabolized form of nicotine in their blood to the tune of almost like a cigarette a day? Guess which group? Multi-neutronic. Yeah. So that's a lot of exposure. Even when mom and dad are doing everything right, you have this level of exposure. You know, it is an issue. You have smoke going from unit to unit. Some people, you know, will say, "Can I put an air filter in?" You can try it, right? A smoke eater, that's not going to do it. You could try some HEPA filter, charcoal filter, and actively manage it, like a hospital grade one. Yes, that would probably give you some relief. But often I've heard people try it and it doesn't work. There's still exposure. Next slide. So, okay, we have our building, and it's a good building, and it's up to code. Board of Health inspector comes over. It's great, no problem at all. But you have smoke going from unit to unit. You're worried about it. What are some of the health effects that you are thinking about, or your residents are thinking about? Well, I talked about it a little bit earlier, right? You have this increased chance of both lung cancer and plenty of other cancers too, breast, pancreas, prostate, colon. A lot of these are connected with it. There's an association there, but also stroke and heart attack, and asthma. Both an asthma attack and asthma induction, the actual creation of asthma as a chronic disease, and other respiratory conditions. So you have these immediate health effects that people are worried about, and the risk of fire, too. Yeah.
Is that statistic there in the second paragraph, the 25-30% increase in the risk of lung cancer, etc.? Does that include the spillover, the units where it spills over through ductwork, etc., or is this just, I live in a home and my father smokes?
What they did there is they surveyed non-smokers. And so they didn't break it down into exactly where they live, but it was non-smokers exposure. So you're right, it might be a little bit less.
That's a minimum. Well, I mean, if
Yeah,
you're in a
yeah.
unit with somebody who's smoking, it's going to be higher.
Oh yeah, the concentrations will probably be higher. I can't speak to the exact conditions of that. But, there are situations where you have smoke going to unit, and it's pretty high levels of concentration. The risk of fire, though, that's certainly not contained to one unit. So, unattended cigarettes are the leading cause of fire-related mortality in Massachusetts, in every state in the country. And ironically, our cigarettes are supposed to be fire-safe. They've mandated regulations supposed to be fire-safe. They're not. Ask your fire department. They're very worried about oxygen and fires because they have a lot of fires on this. And can you go to the next slide? So I just have one slide, but you can see this is from the Plymouth Fire Department, Plymouth, Massachusetts. They pulled this couch out, and you can see the smoke here. I don't have the other slide that shows it pull the cushions away. But what happens is people, they drop an ember, and it sits there, and it smolders and smolders, and they leave the room, and then it kind of catches on fire. Next slide. And so this is a unit in affordable housing in Plymouth, and you can see, I could show you the other pictures, it's totally destroyed. Does anybody want to guess what that is?
Extension cord?
Guess. Anybody else? That's an oxygen line. It's an oxygen line. Yeah. So that's, what happens is the body becomes oxygen closed. It's actually a recommendation. If someone uses oxygen and smokes, they're supposed to take the oxygen off, turn it off, wait a certain amount of time, I think it's like 20 plus minutes, for the oxygen to get out of their clothing, get off their facial hair, get out of the body, then they can go have a cigarette. People don't do that, right? So you get a lot of fires, very legitimate concerns about oxygen and smoking. Next slide. Okay, here Mom was doing everything right. She was out on the front deck, not inside, and she flicked her cigarette, and guess where it landed? Yes, yeah. We're seeing a dramatic increase in mulch fires because of smoke-free policies. So when we talk about what your rules should look like, it should definitely say get away from the building and get away from the mulch. And they actually just updated the mulch regs last year. The fire marshal's office, I think, issued an update on those because of this problem. So okay, no more scary fire slides, I promise. Next one, please. All right, let's talk about the bottom line as far as financial, okay? We knew this would be an important question, and so we did basically a political poll. This is a surveying company in Massachusetts to ask people about their preferences around smoking in buildings. So demand, in other words. And so the following slides are just a few bits of that. You have some in your handouts. We have a full copy of the report too. So in the end, when you fill out the evaluation form, please leave your email address because you can get all this in electronic form and other stuff. So we did the survey. This was done in 2008. It's a random dial-digit telephone survey. It's like a political poll, so it's statistically significant. It represents what's really out there, or I should say was out there in 2008. And so with that, let's take a look at some of them. Next slide. Okay, so I'm looking for a place, right? Go to Craigslist, I guess. I haven't looked in a while. Go to Craigslist or whatever the listing is. What do I think? I'm a typical person. What do I think when I see a place advertised as building-wide, no smoking rule? And here's the impression. I'm immediately more interested. You have captured almost 90% of the market. Most of them are more interested. These people are neutral. You have only 11.5 who say, I don't like that. I'm going to move away. Does anybody know what the smoking rate in Massachusetts is generally? Varies from town to town. It's about 18, 16% right now. It used to be much higher. Not long ago, it was 40%. Really, relatively recently, 20, 30 years ago. So it's gone down quite a bit. So you actually have smokers who are either neutral or prefer a non-smoking building. Okay, let's try another one. What about if I go, okay, I like a place, it wasn't advertised as smoke-free, but I'm going to go check it out. So I come over, and I walk in, and I go, stale cigarette smoke. What's that going to make me think? I'm immediately less interested. Even people, 5% of people, presumably smokers, I'm not sure, who are more interested. But that means you have a lot of people, 14, 19%. So you have, it's an immediate turnoff if they smell smoke. Not surprising at all. Next slide, please. Okay, would you be willing to pay more? There's another measure of preference and demand, and you can see you have just over 40% are willing to pay more for a building that's no smoking building wide. Okay, and you can see here's a breakdown of how much more. So of those 40%, 60% of those would pay 10% more, and 30%, just under 30%, would pay 20% more. So this is an amenity that people are looking for. So we've measured demand in a few ways, and the market report has some other examples of that. Let's turn it over and look at supply, right? Because that's kind of the other side of the equation. So centrifugal. So this was in 2008. We measured the supply. You have this huge demand, not surprising because most people don't smoke, right? And most people aren't exposed in the workplace, so why at home? You would think that supply would be bigger, right? Well, it is getting bigger. In the past 2 or 3 years alone, over 26,000 units of municipal housing have gone smoke-free. Springfield, Boston, Greenfield, Wayland, North Adams, Lowell just went.
Through the town?
Yeah, through the town. So this is a municipal housing authorities. They, as landlords, decide to go.
Housing
Yeah.
authority.
Yeah, housing authorities.
Have any towns done it through the
No.
an ordinance or anything?
No, we'll talk a little bit about that. No, they haven't. Some out in California, actually.
Uh-huh.
None here. not here. But, you know, what I'm getting at is the supply is increasing. And so I talked about municipal housing authorities, but you have a lot of private managers of affordable properties and you know, market rate and whole range and condos. So this supply is increasing, but it's certainly not meeting demand. So you have a high demand, relatively low supply still. Translates into economic opportunity. Not surprising people would be willing to pay more for it. Still, this isn't surprising, is it? You know, because not long ago, a lot of us used to smoke. So supply is catching up to demand. Next slide is surprising. You may be thinking, Chris, the person you're talking about is not renting in my properties. You know, I rent to someone completely different. I know who I rent to, and you're not talking about him or her. What we tried to do to address that is we asked the people in the survey, tell us a little bit about yourself. How much do you make? You know, where'd you get to high school, college, past that? You know, some things to help us understand who we're talking to. And one would expect with lower income, lower education, they tend to have higher smoking rates. That's just how it plays out, you know, in Massachusetts and other states. But what we found is despite where you know, how much education you had or how much you made, there was still a pretty high demand across the board for this policy. That was a surprising piece of this survey. And since then, you know, I mentioned the municipal housing authorities gone smoke-free. Every one of them has done a survey of their residents before they went smoke-free. Okay? And every one of those surveys turned out a very high percent of people in support of this, of residents. 75, 80, 85%, even 90% of residents in housing authority say, yeah, we like this too. We think this is a good idea. I mention that because this is not just, you know, some guy with a PhD saying, I want to go smoke-free. It's a demand across the board. It's a pretty strong demand right across the board. Next slide. See where we're at. Okay, we also did, to give you a little insight to some landlords who have gone smoke-free, and we'll talk about enforcement and how to go smoke-free, but we also, in the survey in 2008, talked to about 350 landlords. And we asked them, okay, you went smoke-free, was it a good idea? And we had 99% say, yes, it was a good idea. Pretty good, pretty good. 90% said it was easy to implement. We actually asked them to break it down. Okay, so why is that the case? And, you know, tell us about vacancy, tell us about turnover, tell us about the cost of rehabbing a unit, disputes amongst residents, and all of these factors, when we asked them about them, improved. I think the main point that they focused on was the cost of rehabbing a unit where someone was allowed to smoke compared to a unit where someone was not allowed to smoke. Has anybody had that experience?
Oh, yeah.
Can you share with it a little bit?
Well, it's big time expense. You get a heavy smoker inside for several years,
Yeah,
it takes a lot to deal with that.
yeah. Ma'am, you were.
We had a couple for maybe 10 years in a second-story apartment, and the woman was smoking all the time, constantly. Oh, we tried to binge the apartment after she left. You could still, it could reek of smoke. You couldn't get rid of that smell at all.
Yeah.
Everything was yellow, it's gross.
Particularly on like a wet day like this,
Oh,
it
it's
pulls that
awful.
smell out.
Yeah, just the cleaning end of it, you know,
Yeah.
getting it washed down.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's what I hear most.
Do they do an exterior smoking area or something, these guys? Or?
Well, let's get into that. Let's talk about what the rule should look like. So, well, first of all, it's legal to prohibit smoking. Smoking is not a protected right. Okay, even in your home, it's not a protected right. The Constitution protects things like free speech, religion, philosophy, and the right to associate, but it's not going to give a heightened level of protection for smoking. Okay, so we'll just get out of the way. Next slide. All right, so let's talk about the rule. You asked about where people should go. Let's go right down and say, let's say, okay, you're thinking of you're going to go smoke-free, right? I've convinced you. Maybe you've heard of others going smoke-free. So now the next step is, what should my rule look like and how should I implement it? So we'll start with what should the rule look like. The first thing is, your rule says no smoking. Not no smokers, no smoking, okay? That's what all your rules basically say. They say, this conduct is okay, that conduct is not okay. They never say, I want this type of person, not that type of person, right? So same thing here, no smoking. Grandfathering, all right? Very few people do this. So by grandfathering, I mean your current residents who smoke, you say, okay, I'm gonna let you smoke until you move out. You know, you live here for 10 years, fine, you can continue smoking for 10 years. Most people don't do this. The reason why is, if you grandfather someone, you're not a smoke-free property. Yeah, and you were going to say it's...
It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
I'm the director of the housing authority,
Oh, okay.
and that's what we have.
Oh, okay. Would you mind sharing which... Well, okay.
Housewives a nightmare. I'm curious.
Yeah.
East Hampton has them.
Oh, East Hampton, I'm sorry. I didn't want to put you on the spot. I'm sorry. So, I mean, from my experience, maybe we can just share a little bit about it. With the hypothetical, I live in your unit, right? In one of your buildings, and I've been smoking for a while. And I'm going to keep smoking, despite what my neighbors say. And guess what? I'm going to host a smoking party in my place. I'm where all the people go to smoke. And then let's say you have someone who comes in, all right, a new person, maybe she smokes, and she moves right next to me. And maybe she's smoking in the unit, and you go up to say, you know, we have this rule that you knew about when you moved in. See, here's where you signed on the lease, and now you're smoking. There's a good chance that she might say, it's not me, it's Chris next door, the guy's grandfather. And by the way, his smoke is coming into my unit and it's bothering me. So it really, it really complicates enforcement. I don't recommend doing it. And most people places that go smoke-free are not doing it at this point. Okay, you asked about designated smoke. You know, where do they go? Okay. Well, we know they're not going to smoke anywhere in the building, in any units. And we're not going to let them smoke on the deck. Maybe they have a deck off their unit. That's even worse sometimes, because the smoke goes right back in the next unit. It's pulled right back in the window of the unit or above. We know we're not going to let them stand right outside the front door, because they're going to set the mulch on fire, or the smoke's going to go right back in. So you have some options. You're going to move away from the building where you're going to ask people to smoke. You could say, you have to go off the property. Legally, you can say that. Go off the property. In fact, I would say most places do say that. You can also say you have to be 30 feet, or 20 feet, or 50 feet, whatever it is, away from any building. Not a lot of places do that as much. Because honestly, who walks around with a tape measure and says, I'm 50 feet away from the building? Or you can designate a smoking area. Okay? You know, a good percentage of places designate a smoking area. It really depends on your property. Depends on your residents. I mean, you make the rules, but you'll get input from your residents about this. Maybe as a housing authority, you have board members. You know, so you make a choice about this. Just a few thoughts on designated smoking area. If you're going to have this, don't have it right outside the front door. In fact, don't have it on the walk, from the parking lot to walk in. Don't put the designated smoking area there. You want to put it off to the side a little bit, because you don't want people walking through the smoke. Right? So that's one thing. The other thing with the designated smoking area, and actually a buffer too, you're going to get people congregating out there. Okay? And you're going to have the responsibility of dealing with this new area. So access, maintaining it, light, noise, that sort of thing. Maybe you want that there. Maybe you don't want that on the public sidewalk next to your neighbors. I don't know. That's your property. But you may have that issue. When you have a designated smoking area, the problem is you're going to get smoke drifting back into the building and people are going to see it. Where if you don't have it, you're more of a smoke-free property and people are more likely to comply because you're more of a smoke-free property. Okay, all buildings are some. I suggest being consistent across the board. Some places have had smoking buildings and non-smoking buildings, so Worcester has, Worcester Housing Authority has this. They started with 2 buildings, I think they have 4 now that are smoke-free, and they have, the request to go back and forth. You have different treatment for different people depending on where they are. So my recommendation is you just be consistent, right? You're consistent with your other rules. Why would you make an exception here? So those are some of the parameters of the rule. Let's keep going to the next slide. Let's see. Okay. You know what your rule's going to look like. Yeah.
There's a question about that.
Yeah.
What about people smoking in their car on the property?
Oh yeah, good point, thanks. They're violating the rule. If you're sitting in your car and the property is totally no smoking, you're on the property. So they would be asked to move off the property. And that's what a lot of property management companies have done. There's a reason behind that.
With the door?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you close yourself and fishbowl yourself, that person's really going to absorb into their clothing. When they come back from the building, that smoke is being re-emitted. So it's a little better to have them out, at least the car moving, or step out for fresh air or something like that.
I'm in a condo situation, but still I think it applies in various ones. There's very few places people can smoke anymore,
Yeah.
and I'm lifelong anti-smoker. But what if they're out and they're smoking in their car because that's the only place, and they're finishing up their cigarette and they drive on and they park? I just don't know.
Well, I mean, we have to be, we can't, there's a certain amount of flexibility. So if they're driving and they park, that's going to be
Tricky.
sort of, but I was going to say an inconsequential sort of violation. No one's going to be, say, oh, you're violating the rule, unless I were to create a problem. And I can't really see, unless they like flick the butts out into the driveway, maybe. But let's talk about marijuana. Should we include this in your rule? Well, this is a tricky one, right? Because marijuana could provide, and I guess will provide, medical relief for folks. In fact, it's a medicine in Massachusetts, if you have your card, right? If you just have a bag or a joint, it's not a medicine until you have it prescribed and you have a card, right? But let's say someone comes to you and says, I've got my medical marijuana card. I don't want to talk about the medical conditions, but I need this for treatment. Well, let's talk about how you think that through. The first thing is, if you wanted to, could you say, well, you can't smoke in the property? And the legal answer is yes, you can say that for 2 reasons. First, marijuana of any type is absolutely illegal under federal law. It's a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substance Act. Okay, and the disability law, and in fact the state statute itself says you're not required as a landlord to allow or facilitate the use of the Schedule I drug. Okay, and federal law trumps state law. Also, you can look to the regulations, and the regulations that the Department of Public Health passed. You have the statute and the state regulations. The regulations say nothing in here. In fact, I think it's, can you go 2 slides? Maybe. Oh, right here, back 1. So here's the state statute. Nothing in here requires a violation of federal law or purports to give you immunity under that, right? So you're not required to violate the Controlled Substance Act here. And here's what the state regs say. Nothing in here changes the rights of landlords. This was added after landlords said, what about our smoke-free policies? Okay, so legally that's where you are. Has this played out in other states? Yeah, we've seen this in the state of Washington that had medical marijuana, and there was an eviction, and the judge said, look, what do you want me to do? It's illegal under federal law. This can't be a viable defense to your eviction for medical purposes. We haven't had cases here, so we may have more cases on this. But that's the law as it is now. Here's a practical balance, right? Someone comes to you, has a medical marijuana card, and says, I'm going to use medical marijuana. I need to use it. You could say, okay, I understand. If you're inside the property, you know I have a no smoking rule. If you're inside the property, would you please use an edible form or liquid form, which the dispensaries are required to dispense. And these products are powerful and have a fast dose response, and because of that, presumably can deliver the medical benefit and relief that some people may require. But as far as smoking it, you can say, okay, that's okay inside the building. If you want to smoke it, you do have to go outside and comply with the no smoking rule. I think that strikes a fair balance on this. And it makes your life easier because basically you're saying, I don't care what you smoke, take it outside. All right? So it's a pretty fair balance. Next slide. Have folks seen these?
Can I just ask you one
Yeah,
question
yeah,
before you go on?
please, yeah.
They're going to legalize it. That's pretty much given.
Yeah, I think
Is that
it's
going to
something
change everything once they legalize it?
At the federal level, you mean?
State
The
level.
state level.
State by
State
state.
level.
Federal
Well, the
laws.
federal level still applies. The
So-
federal law still
Well, it does change things. So, I mean, so it's medical now, so it enjoys a heightened level of protection, right? Because it's medical. Now, that heightened level of protection is in conflict with federal law, so it's all mixed up. Once they make it totally legal, presumably it'll be recreational, like more like cigarettes. So
That
it would make life easier. As a lawyer, I'd say, oh, it's easier to answer that question.
Okay.
Management-wise, you may have more people using it, and you may want this rule even more so because you're going to have more people smoking.
Yeah, people that don't smoke cigarettes would be smoking, yeah.
Maybe. We're going to see. We're going to see
We'll
what
see what
happens, right?
happens,
Yeah. We'll see what happens with this.
I'm just afraid of the discrimination of, you know what I mean? If you were to say something to somebody and they have the state right to smoke the marijuana and you're saying no, and it's just,
Yep. No, it's tricky. It's tricky. People are passionate about this, right? People are
Oh,
passionate
yeah.
about it. So if you get that request, I've given you what I think is a legal response, but I would suggest thinking it through, covering all your bases, probably talking to your counsel about this, because this is a first experience with this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it's new. Even a lot of attorneys are going to be like, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Most will be like that. Yeah.
Are you in the process or anticipating redoing the early information in your presentation regarding the effects of secondhand smoke of marijuana?
Interesting question. There's not a lot of research that I'm aware of on the effects of secondhand marijuana smoke, largely because it was illegal.
Right.
But cigarettes were legal, and they're like, what's going on here? It's legal, but let's look at the effect. And it was 30% of our population smoking. The leading preventable cause of death, every year, more than all murders, all suicides, all drug use, all alcohol use, homicides combined every year. That's how many people are killed by tobacco still today. So because of that, there's been a lot of research on it. Marijuana, I don't think there's been, I can't speak to that as much, but it's a combustive material. So I know that healthcare professionals are saying if you can vaporize it or have an edible form, that's better than smoking. So there's probably some health effect there. Yeah.
I went to a presentation recently by the head of thoracic oncology, a surgeon from Bay State. And this was a subject, was certainly the legalization of marijuana. I was talking about tobacco, but the legalization of marijuana, what is the impact going to be? What was the research? And she said the latest research that they have at this time, and this was about 6 weeks ago, was that one joint smoked as prescribed, which is inhaled and held in, is the equivalent of a pack of cigarettes. A pack of cigarettes. So there's been very little research on the about the carcinogens in marijuana, and also the impact on its contribution to lung cancer. That will change, but what the initial research seemed to be demonstrating was a joint equaled a pack of cigarettes.
Yeah.
Smoked,
Interesting.
when smoked.
But again, compare that to the medical benefit. You know, if administered through an edible, or so it's a complicated issue. But there are obviously effects to the secondhand smoke of it. Here's another product. Have folks seen e-cigarettes? How could you not?
Store in town here.
Yeah, these things are, well, first of all, who makes them?
Cigarette company.
Yeah, so they're not cessation products, okay? They're not. They don't
Like
help,
little nips, though.
they don't help you quit. Maybe you use them instead of cigarettes. We're actually seeing a lot of dual use. We're actually seeing a lot of dual use, which is a big concern. These things are taken off with kids. Kids, they were legal to sell to kids until not long ago, and then, thanks to a Board of Health, you prohibited the sale to kids. Some towns still have not done that. So the use is taken off with kids, all right? They are certainly less harmful than traditional cigarettes, but they're not harmless. And there's a range. These things are not regulated. Like a lot of products, these aren't regulated, like traditional cigarettes. So they can kill 1 out of 10 people, they can kill 2 out of 10 people, they can kill 3 out of 10 people. There's no regulation on that. Same with these things. All right, so you get a wide variety. You have some that have trace amounts of carcinogens in the vapor. And then you have others that have much more carcinogens in the vapor that they emit. So you got a variety here. Oh, they're all addictive. I mean, they pretty much all have nicotine. There are a few that say no nicotine, but I think that most of them have it. And they come in these crazy flavors: honeydew, watermelon, fruit juice, candy cane, whatever, blah, 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 on and on. So what do you do with these? Right? Well, it's your choice whether you want to include them. I think that, and what I hear a lot of landlords doing is they say, I don't care what it is, take it outside. All right? So they include e-cigarettes in the rule. The reason they do this is because the last thing they want to do is knock on someone's door and take a look at the e-cigarette and say, which brand is that? Okay, you can smoke, you can use those, you can't use those. Or here, you have to use these different ones. Or, you know, that sort of stuff. So I think it's more cleaner, more consistent to say, look, take it outside. Now the truth is, some of these products, very few, aren't like super candy flavored. And people may be able to sneak them in their units. But really there's no violation if you're not aware of it. Right? How do you respond to current problems? Someone complains, right? But if you don't get a complaint or don't have evidence, then you're not going to do any enforcement. Same with here. So people might be able to sneak these, but if you do have an enforcement problem, you're just saying, take it outside. So that's what the landlords do. They say, okay, we're going to go smoke free. We're not going to have grandfathering. I'm going to do it on all my buildings. I'm not going to have a designated smoking area. I don't have a lot of area. Just go out to the sidewalk. I'm going to include marijuana, and I'm going to include e-cigarettes in my rule. So let's say that's where you are. And so let's go to the next slide. How do you implement it? I recommend implementing it through a lease change, and we'll talk about condos in a second, because they have a different process. I'm looking for the model lease addendum. I don't see it. There's
There.
Okay. Well, it's done through a lease addendum, and we can send electronic copies of it. There's actually a model lease addendum in this packet. Grab that one. This is a model lease addendum for public housing authorities. This is, okay, well, we don't need to worry about that. So here's how the process is done. You have your model lease, you have your lease addendum, okay? And what you do is you make your decision to go smoke-free. All right. Maybe you obtain approval. Maybe you have a board, something like that, or some other folks, partners or something. So you all make a decision to go smoke-free. And what you do is you set a date 1 year in the future. So today, June 12th, 2014, you start the process. Your effective date for everyone It's the same date. It's that 1 year in the future, June 12, 2015. And throughout that year, what you're doing is everybody's re-signing, when they renew their lease or recertify, that's when they sign the no smoking lease addendum. All right? And that happens maybe throughout the year. If you're month to month, obviously you don't have to wait a year. Still though, don't do it in 1 month or 60 days. Do it like 90 days or even longer. Because you want to do some education here. You want to give people a chance to get angry and accept the rule and figure out how they're going to comply with this rule.
Is there a legal way landlords can use other than the renewal of the lease agreement? Because what I often see here in East Hampton is perhaps true everywhere, is landlord gets a new tenant and they write a lease for 1 year. At the end of the year, they don't renew it. The idea is that if I like this tenant, I'll keep her and I won't renew the lease. No obligation on me, the landlord. If I don't like this tenant in the first year, I have this lease and she violates the lease, I can kick her out. And so it's kind of a little bit of a legal game that landlords play. So, but the reality is that a lot of landlords don't ever renew the lease beyond the first year. And certainly don't do it on an annual basis. Maybe some do, but I think most don't. So what would you do in that case if you're a landlord with that practice and you probably have no intention of ever writing leases again?
Okay, so you're outside the first year. Then your tenants are presumably they're tenants at will.
Yes.
So they pay monthly.
Legally, they would be.
So you legally your lease term is each month, right? And you kind of renew your lease.
Yeah, it goes to the 30-day.
Yeah. So you're at the 30 day. So that one you can go much faster. You still have to give notice, right? If you're in a month-to-month situation or even a tenancy at will, you got to give notice. Hey, I'm going to increase the rent by $50. You got to put the trash cans here. I'm going to do this, and hey, here's a copy of the no smoking lease addendum, which you're going to be required to sign, when the lease renews, or the 30 days, whatever it is, and it's going to be effective for everybody at this date. Okay, so they can for those folks, they have tenancies at will, month to month. They can go faster if they want, but do have the time in there, because really the most important thing you can do, enforcement-wise, is to spend a little time in the beginning telling residents why you're going smoke-free. So for market rate, it's not as important, okay, because they can kind of relocate it more easily. But for affordable properties, education and resident engagement is critically important. So surveys and resident meetings and information about cessation services. So you don't have to quit residence, but if you're interested in quitting or learning how to cut back, there are a lot of cessation resources for you. We actually have a few things on the table. So those types of meetings, even if you are smoke-free already, have those meetings now. Bring that cessation person in to talk about it now as a follow-up. That's the real reason to having that extra timeline. There's illegal stuff you got to worry about it, but you really want to work on the education because you're worried about enforcement and compliance. One thing I want to point out in the lease, and I can just describe it, and by the way, this is in condo docs too, you have a no smoking rule. You don't have a smoke-free rule. Okay, there's a difference. You're not going to guarantee that it's a smoke-free environment. You're going to do your best to enforce your no smoking rule, but you can't guarantee it's a smoke-free environment. What if you're on a public sidewalks right outside the window and smoke comes in? You can't stop that. It's a public sidewalk, right? What if you do have someone who violates the rule? Well, you're not allowed to go pull that person out right away and put them on the street. You have a whole process there, which can become complicated, right? So you actually, in the lease addendum, you disclaim any responsibility for this, and you say, I'm not a guarantor of smoke-free air. Yes, I have a smoke-free policy, but I'm not a guarantor of smoke-free air. So that's an important thing in both the amendments for a condo and for rental properties. Let me talk a second about condos too. Their process is also easy, but politically maybe not. Legally, yes. So here's the process in a nutshell. Okay, it's, you gotta have a vote, right? You have to have a certain percentage of the ownership say, yes, we like this rule, we agree to amend our master deed and our trust. And once you hit that percentage, which is typically like 75%, it varies, but once you hit that percentage, you can amend your master deed and trust. These are the documents that created the condominium, and it can be binding on everybody, including residents that have lived there and smoked. Okay? The reason that's the case is because when someone buys a unit in a condominium, they buy it subject to the rules in place at the time of purchase, providing the reasonable rules, and reasonable rules that are put in place in the future. Right? If condos didn't allow that, they would not be able to keep up with the change in society around all sorts of different stuff. Okay, so there's got to be a process built in to allow for that change. And it's there. So it's typically, the way practically it works is trustees get interested, do some research. They hold a meeting for all the unit owners, the condo association. People comment. Then trustees say, okay, we're going to have a vote. And trustees sometimes send out the ballot with a letter saying, you know, we think this is a good idea, but it's your choice, so please vote. Some trustees prefer to remain neutral. I encourage trustees to actually take an educated position and recommendation. Why not? They're trustees. They have a fiduciary obligation. So, you know, I think it's pretty obvious that they can do it and should. Then they do the vote. And the hardest part is actually getting people to vote. I mean, that's the hardest part of any election or any type of thing. So, you know, they have to, sometimes it's knocking on doors. It's not just a day, it's a week or even a month. It takes a little bit of time. Let's assume they get the vote. Then they can file the amendment at the Registry of Deeds, and it's effective upon filing. And then we talk about enforcement. So let's go to enforcement for rental properties.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Do you have information on insurance rates versus smoking and non-smoking property?
Yeah, really good question. Another potential benefit. I know a few insurance companies have advertised a discount. Unfortunately, they're not in Massachusetts. All right. I have heard of people going back to their insurance companies and negotiating a discount. Typically, it's around the fire. There's an allowance for reduced risk of fire, things you can do to reduce the risk, and there's an allowance there. And so I've heard of people getting a reduction. Definitely ask your insurance broker. Ask about this. A few more things on affordable properties. So I mentioned that education is critically important. So a lot of site-based meetings, engage residents, offer cessation services. If you have some resident leaders, tenant council, work with them, engage them. Bring in partners from outside, health centers, talk to visiting nurse associations and other service providers. Say, we're smoke-free, so if your folks are on our property, they can't smoke. They can't smoke with their clients, because a lot of home health care aides have been known to smoke with their clients. That's got an end, right? These people need to know too. Obviously your staff can't smoke on the property. It's not just residents can't no smoking, it's everybody no smoking. You know the other stuff about the lease change. So education is critically important before implementation, during, and even during enforcement. And I would say even in a market rate, you want to, in a letter, when you notify people about this, you want to talk about why you're doing this. You know, you don't want to have people think this is arbitrary. You know, dear resident, we will be going smoke-free as of this date. I'm doing this because I believe there are important health and safety benefits to this. This is a trend in amongst landlord properties. So you will be asked to sign a no smoking lease addendum when your lease renews. You know, it shows you're thoughtful, right? It shows you're engaged. Instead of, hey, here's a no smoking lease addendum, you're going to sign this. Or you're going to move out. That's not a good way to deliver it. Next slide, please. I guess we'll get to enforcement. I forgot this stuff. Challenges, people think this is a violation of their rights. It's a tough change for folks, no doubt about it. All right, someone has smoked their entire life. Maybe they've lived in this unit for 20 years and they've smoked. We're asking them to change this behavior. this behavior that's intertwined with a powerful addiction. So it's not easy, but it's doable. But as far as the rights, well, look, juxtapose two rights here. The right of someone to smoke in a unit, and the right of the person, rights of the person in the neighboring unit to actually be able to breathe. You know, let's say they're asthmatic, and they can't breathe when the neighbor's smoke comes in. Which right do you think is more important? Right? Both rights are real. Yeah.
Would you say secondhand smoke violates or interferes with a neighboring tenant's right to quiet enjoyment?
There have been a few cases on that, yes. Yes. There was a case years ago, before we even started talking about smoke-free housing. It was in Boston. A tenant lived over a bar, and there was a lot of smoke coming up. So it wasn't just a little bit of exposure, it was a lot coming up. And the judge said, violation of quiet enjoyment, landlord, you're in trouble, tenant, you get your rent free and plus some other stuff. So there is that type of case. I understand there's a case in Springfield right now that's involved, that's involves a similar type of claim. I don't know any specifics about it. I'll mention the other legal liability now. I'd be more concerned with the person who has asthma, right? And says, look, landlord, I know I have a disability, I qualify under disability law, I can read it in the statute myself. And I know you have a responsibility to accommodate my disability, thus I want a smoke-free unit. And you go, okay, I'm not smoke-free, I got a 1-year lease, what am I going to do with your neighbor who smokes? Ouch. That's a tough case. That's a tough case. I think there are other more important reasons for going smoke-free, but if we're talking about the legal liability, it's something to consider. And I'll talk about some cases on that. But you know, individual rights, people are angry, but they don't have the right to smoke in the unit, okay? At least not past their lease term. If you properly change the lease, it's your property, you get to set the rules for it, as long as they're compliant with the law. Staff buy-in, you get some staff sometimes, or visiting home health care aides. You know, they don't really buy into this sometimes they smoke. You're concerned about other quality of life issues like drug use and stuff. Why are you going smoke-free? We're dealing with illegal drugs in the property. Why would you do this? Well, you know, secondhand smoke is still pretty dangerous, and it's something you can do, a step towards improving the health and safety of your building. Why would you wait and not do it? But you do get this pushback, right? Next slide, please. All right, so we'll move into enforcement and just some general things. This is enforced like any other rule. Okay, you're not randomly knocking on doors. It's complaint driven. When you go smoke-free, you've done the education. You want to now respond quickly to any violations that you have. That lets people know that you take it seriously. Hey, my neighbor's smoking. Okay, can you put that in writing? And I'll go take a look. That means a lot. Put up signs. This is a no smoking building. If you have ashtrays right at the front door, those outside, those weird gooseneck looking ones, move those away from the building. You know, you have a smoke-free property now. Do the things that make it look like a smoke-free property. Next slide. Okay, so same sort of thought. You know, education, cessation may continue. You got to educate a lot of folks. You got no smoking signs. Financially responsible, that's security deposit. Designated smoking area away from the building. Ask residents to inform their guests. They're legally responsible for what their guests do. But it's tough sometimes when mom is going to have her son over and her son smokes. Mom doesn't want to chase her son out of the building because the son never goes to see mom. So, but you do have to tell mom, you know, we have a smoke-free property. You tell your son this. Yeah?
Did I misunderstand you? I thought you were making a point early on about the importance in housing situations, like group housing situations, like kind of to call it a no smoking policy rather than a smoke-free policy.
Yeah, or did I call it, do I have
Well,
smoke-free?
everywhere it says smoke-free. I mean, in the literature, it says smoke-free there, it says smoke-free, and I'm confused by, maybe I just misunderstood what you meant.
Yeah,
Or is that just shorthand for?
I'm sorry,
Sure.
it's shorthand and it's something that needs to be changed.
Oh,
It's something that needs to be changed. Yeah, but the legal stuff, when you do this, it's got to be no smoking. Good point, thank you, thank you. Let's keep going to the next slide. I don't think you'll see this, but you may. You go smoke-free and you get a notice from a doctor that says, my patient needs to be able to smoke. This happened in the Milford, Connecticut Housing Authority. The day after they went smoke-free, like 6 years ago, a healthcare provider from one of the residents sent a letter to the executive director and said, my patient needs a waiver from your new rule because she suffers from anxiety, depression, and things like that. And so the executive director responded by saying, okay, we need some more information to process this reasonable accommodation request. Among the other questions he asked, would you please point to the clinical guidelines that recommend smoking as a treatment for these conditions? They don't exist. Smoking is not a treatment for any physical or mental condition. Stop. End of sentence. No exception. You have old-timer, I don't want to say old-timers, but it used to be, all right, go smoke them if you got them. You're stressed out, go smoke a cigarette. That's not a medical recommendation. Plus, so anyway, so there's no nexus between you have a condition and smoking as a treatment, right? There's not a nexus there. Plus, if you were allowed, if you had to allow someone to smoke on the property, that fundamentally alters your property, right? You have to do a reasonable accommodation, not an unreasonable accommodation. So there are limits to what you can be required to do. But really, this, I've heard this is rare, the reasonable accommodation request. The ones I've heard about have been denied, and I haven't seen any litigation on this. Here's the other case. This is a litigation case. This is before any places were going smoke-free. Again, someone in the Cohasset Housing Authority sued the housing authority for smoke coming into their unit. And the judge, I'm paraphrasing, basically said, you know what, that's a good claim. But the irritation in your throat, that's not enough. If you had asthma, I'd let this thing go to trial because I think it's a good claim. But the facts here don't support it. So that's basically what the judge said. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. This is, someone can make a claim out of this. And in fact, there are some cases of people doing that. There's a litigation down in Florida, several years old now, where a resident was sent to the emergency room like 3 times in a HUD property. HUD stepped in and sued the manager of the property because this person's disability, asthma, was not being accommodated. Again, I don't want you to focus on the litigation side of it, but if you're worried about accommodation, disability litigation, this is where I think you may see some problems. And I've talked to a lot of lawyers who represented people in disability claims. Let's go to the next slide. Evidence. I should say before we start getting into enforcement too much more, that evictions are rare. Compliance is really high. Most people like this rule, want this rule, and if given a little education and know about it, it's like a speed limit. If you didn't post the speed limit, people wouldn't know what it is. With education, people like this rule and to a large extent comply with it. Okay? Maybe it requires a warning letter or a second warning, or maybe they had a party and someone smoked. It's these sorts of infractions that you may have. But let's say that doesn't work. Your warning letters don't work. If you're a housing authority or affordable property, you've had a sit-down meeting, that hasn't worked. You've done all the creative stuff of reaching out to the emergency contacts, the service providers. You sort of work with this residents network to try to achieve compliance, and that doesn't work. And you move to a lease action. Okay. What sort of evidence would you need? Right? Well, the judge has a tough job. The judge has to believe somebody and call the other person, a liar, right? And on top of that, the judge is being asked to put someone in the street. And that's tough, So some thoughts about the evidence. First, you want to have that very thick file that describes everything you've done to go smoke-free. Your Honor, I have bent over backwards to implement this very important health and safety rule. I started this, Your Honor, because there was a fire. Hold up the clipping from the newspaper in town. I was next to that property. I didn't want it to happen to mine. It was caused by an unattended cigarette. And there's all this information. And we took a year to implement. And here's a notice. Here's a signed lease addendum. Here's the education we've done. We brought in this person. We brought in the fire department. Whatever. You've done all this stuff. So you're telling a story that you didn't just say no smoking and then came right into court. You've really done a lot of work to bring the residents along. Okay? That's important. Also important is the detailed description of your enforcement. So, Your Honor, we had a written complaint. We went up and inspected. We smelled smoke on this date. The second time, I had another staff member went up and checked for smoke. He's here too. He's going to testify. We were given permission to go into the unit where we observed an ashtray in the property. Saw that. There were several burns around that weren't there when we rented the unit. Here are the pictures of before and after. Remember, you have to have permission to go into a unit. All of that type of evidence is very persuasive and very important. Still, though, the judge may not allow it. Right? You may get before the judge, and the judge is like, and he said, well, Your Honor, will you just give an order? Will you please instruct the resident to comply with this rule? And that way, if you have to appear before the person again, the person's not just ignoring your rule, but ignoring the judge's order. Okay? I understand eviction and lease action can be difficult. And actually, I don't want to see anybody be put on the street. But you do have to put this all together to demonstrate how hard and extensively you work to have this person comply with the rule. The one thing, if you do move to eviction, what I'm suggesting that people do is not just get the for-cause eviction, but agree to an agreement or dismissal right before then, where the resident can relocate without having that for-cause eviction on their record. Okay, I'm thinking more about affordable properties here and housing authorities, because we don't want that resident to be denied shelter or things like that. So that would be one thing that I'd suggest is a good move. I get asked a lot, is there equipment to measure smoke? Yes, there is. I've actually heard not a lot of people using this, but let me go through some of it. The first one is like folks are you familiar with like radon, those radon detection? You take the top off, you put it out, it sits there for a while, seal it up, send it off to the lab. You got one of those for secondhand smoke too. And it's a few $100s. And the problem is you got to kind of sit it out there for a few days. But you get a report that's legally defensible, focuses just on nicotine in the air, and I've heard of people using it. Another thing people use, and this is more common, is a particulate sensor. It's like a little device, they're not that big, it just senses the particulate matter. There are a lot of things that produce particulates, so it can be, there can be some problems. But you do a measurement here, in here, and right outside the unit owner's unit, and you see a spike of particulate matter. And so you can kind of infer from that they're smoking inside. There's a product too where it's like a little vacuum and it pulls in a little air onto this filament, and then the filament is sent to a lab and there's a report on that. And then there's a final product that's not on the market yet. It's like the size of a cell phone. And it senses nicotine right off the bat. It just beeps nicotine in the air. That one's not on the market. But my understanding is, it will be. Again, I don't think you need this equipment, but maybe you run into a situation where, you're unsure. You've done everything. You've got your HVAC person trying to identify where the smoke is. You've got the complaints, but you're still not sure. And you don't want to move to a lease action without it. That's your call. I'd say most people do move to a lease action or take enforcement without this stuff. But again, remember, most people comply. And even if you don't get 100%, your property is going to be that much safer and that much healthier with this smoke-free rule. So next slide, please? I'm not sure where we are. We can keep going. This is that disability case in Florida I mentioned. Before I talk about trends, let me talk about enforcement in condominiums. It's actually much easier. The way they do it is first offense, they send, and this is just general, this is not, it's not required across all condos, but generally what they do is they'll send a warning letter. Then if someone violates again, they issue a $100 fine, which automatically becomes a lien on the unit. And then maybe they have for a second offense $200, and for a third and subsequent offenses $300. So you can imagine $300, $300, $300 day after day, a lien on the unit. That's a significant deterrent. I've heard enforcement in condos is not a problem at all. That's what I've heard. And because of that fact, you can issue fines and get this. And then you can get a court order if not. Yeah?
Well, from my own situation and others, other friends who live in different condos, the difficulty is having the trustees do we have a management company, but the trustees tell them what to do, and they're not on site, so there is no management on site. And the trustees, I don't think, are consistent about enforcing any rules. We just get sort of the yearly newsletter, don't park here, everyone parks there, and nothing happens. So,
Yes, you're right. The big difficulty is getting these volunteer trustees to go smoke-free, because they have to support it. And then they can be a little, how do I phrase this correctly, a little bit, they don't devote a lot of attention to enforcement. They just kind of gloss it over it. But if they were focused and devoted on this, they have the tools to do it.
Right.
And I believe they have a fiduciary obligation to enforce the rules. So you as a unit owner can say, we went smoke-free, we have this rule, you are obligated as a trustee to enforce the rules. Please do this without making me, jump through hoops here. I'm just asking you to enforce the rule that was just passed. Easier said than done, but that's your argument. Trends and regulation. There's not a lot out there. Okay, we have a few municipalities in California that have done things like, hey, if you have multi-unit dwellings with more than one level, then it's got to be smoke-free. You have a few places that have done things like, before someone moves in, you have to tell them that you allow smoke in the building. The idea is, they'll say, oh, I don't want to live here, I'm going to go live in this building. I don't know if that works, but that's the idea. And then you have Utah doing some things, and that they're kind of out there. Not out there in the sense that they're crazy, but out there in the sense that they're unique, that not a lot of people are doing the rules they are. What we're really seeing is this trend is voluntary. Okay, I mentioned the housing authorities that have gone 26,000 plus units. I know the large management companies like Maloney and Beacon and Peabody and Corcoran, they're shifting their entire portfolios in Massachusetts and in other states. And then market rate properties, we're seeing a lot of them go smoke-free too. So really this is a trend. And I think it reflects the fact that we have, most people don't smoke, right? And our multi-unit housing stock is going to start changing to reflect that fact. So we're going to have more and more places go smoke-free, and then we're going to have a small percentage of places that don't do anything. And they're just naturally going to have more people who smoke. And so we're going to have this division in our property. When that happens, I don't know. Maybe it's 5 or 10 years down the road. Most places will be smoke-free. A few places will have a lot of smoke in them. I think that's where we're headed. And who knows what we'll see at that point. We may see regulation at that point. I'm not sure. I think that's it. Is it okay? Yeah, that's it. Any questions? Did I cover everything? It's late, isn't it? It's 7:30. Okay, so please fill out the evaluation and definitely jot down your email because we can give you this stuff electronically. I'll give you a copy of the lease addendum. I actually see I have the wrong lease addendum here. So what I'll do is I'm going to take this up and I'm going to send Jackie and Sandra, who organized this, a copy of the electronic copies of all these documents and the market research report and stuff. And they can distribute information to you. And if you have questions, you can email them back and you can connect with me. So thank you very much.
Can I ask one last
And
question?
you all see we have a lot of food left, so.
Yeah, take some food. Yeah,
Do we have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation too?
yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I have a question about the fire regulation, because I think the
Yeah.
outside smoking is an issue where I am, because I
Yeah.
smoke right under my window. So is there some way to, I want to use that as leverage with the trustees, to appoint me and...
Yeah, it's from the fire marshal's office. I don't have it yet. Yeah, it's from all.
2 feet off the building.
Yeah, so what is
No, I'm
it?
not.
6 or more units.
So
You can't mulch against the building.
6 more units, all she's got to be able to those, or if it's concrete, right, it's a concrete side, up to a certain height, you can mulch
Yeah, a
against.
certain level you
Where they
can come
can
down.
So,
So it has to be non-combustible.
People are...
2 feet.
yeah. I would
6 or more.
Google, what's that?
I don't think it's applying to our particular situation. Condos or something. So you're not...
Well, because
Housing has a hammer.
Evaluations